Friends, good evening. My name is Stephen Fitch, and I want to give you a short introduction to the book of Revelation. Now, the book of Revelation is a book unparalleled in the Bible in terms of how much interest it has gained, as well as confusion. And there are a lot of reasons why it's difficult for us modern people, us modern Christians, to read this book. But I think the most difficult, the main reason that this book is so difficult for us is because it challenges us to have a really good understanding of the Old Testament and, in fact, of the whole Bible. If we don't have a good understanding of the whole Bible, if we don't have a good understanding of the whole Old Testament all the way from Genesis to Malachi, then this book is going to be really difficult to understand. So, how does this book open? Well, this book opens in verse 1 by saying this: the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John, who testified to the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ, even to all he saw. And so, if you can see right here, this book is about a message that God gives to Jesus, who gives to an angel, who gives to John. And that might seem weird. Why do you have to go through an angel? Well, in the Old Testament, if you remember, messages always went through an angel, through the angel of the Lord. And in fact, Jesus himself is the ultimate angel of the Lord who became flesh. The Word became flesh in Jesus. And so this is kind of the pivot point between the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, and the New Testament. And so the message is from God to Jesus to an angel to John, and then from John to the other servants of the Lord. And so John is in Patmos. This is a letter to 7 churches. And in verse 9, John identifies himself as a brother, a sharer in Jesus, and he is in the Spirit. This is really important. The whole book has to do with being in the Spirit. He says this again and again. And the fact that this is the Lord's day. The Lord's day is Sunday. It's worship. It's when Christians gather to worship. But it's also the day of the Lord. The Lord's day and the day of the Lord are the same phrase. And the day of the Lord is when God comes to judge the earth and to bring things back into right ordering, into justice, into flourishing. And so this is the day of the Lord. This is probably came to John when he was worshiping on a Sunday. And it's to be read. He said, blessed are those who hear this word, that this would be read in a worship service. And so right in chapter 1, there's this fantastic vision of Jesus, the Son of God, whose voice is as loud as a trumpet. And there's so many Old Testament references here. Voice as loud as a trumpet is in Exodus 19:16. And then you have Jesus walking among the 7 lampstands. So lampstands are really important in this book. And if you remember back in the Old Testament, there was a lampstand, a menorah, in the tabernacle and in the temple. Well, what is the lampstand? It symbolizes the burning bush, and it symbolizes a tree. If you remember in the Garden of Eden, Genesis 2, God is walking among the trees. He walks in the garden. And in the same way, Jesus here is walking among the lampstands. The lampstands are the churches. He's inspecting the churches. He's evaluating them. He's looking at them, seeing if they're up to par, if they're up to snuff. And so if you look at Zechariah chapter 4 in the Old Testament, you'll see the lampstand images as well. Here, Jesus is called Son of Man. Remember that from Daniel chapter 7. He's wearing a robe. He's a high priest. His face is shining. And his feet are like bronze. We remember that in the book of Daniel chapter 10. It says also his voice is like rushing waters. And this is what we hear that God's voice is like in Ezekiel chapter 1. Here Jesus is holding 7 stars, just like how the ancient Caesars would hold 7 stars. If you look at a coin of an ancient Caesar in the Roman Empire, they were holding 7 stars. It had to do with their rule, their dominion. Jesus is holding 7 stars. And in fact, then Jesus is also holding John. He picks John up. And so John is perhaps one of those stars. The stars are the rulers of the church, the pastors. And so then we go on to see those pastors here. We get the 7 letters to the 7 churches. And in the first one, and so these are 7 letters. You got 1, you write it out. You got 1 letter, you got 2 letters, you got 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 letters that Jesus is writing out to his churches. Interestingly, Paul has 7 letters to his churches. And then if you look in the New Testament to the other letters in the New Testament that Paul didn't write, how many are there? There's 7. Paul wrote to 7 churches. Sorry, he wrote 10 letters, but to 7 churches. So you have all of these lists of 7. And in the Bible, we know that the number 7 is something about completion. And so it's a complete list of churches. And it actually tells us that these letters aren't just to these 7 churches. It's not just to Ephesus and Smyrna and Pergamum, Thyatira and Sardis, Philadelphia and Laodicea. It's also to us too. The number 7 is complete. So these are letters to all the churches. And Jesus basically says, you're doing these things good. You're doing these things poorly. You need to shape up. You're broken. You're sinful in these areas. And if you don't shape up, I'm coming to you. But if you overcome, then I will give you these gifts. And he lists different gifts. The tree of life, eat from the tree of life, or come. And in Laodicea, we have that famous line, come, I'm knocking on the door, and I'll come and dine with you. That's the image of the Lord's Supper, of communion. And so there's a lot of worship images here in this book. This book also has the number 7 come up over and over and over. And so we looked at how the number 7, you always have to look at the 7 days of creation in Genesis 1. And in fact, these 7 days of creation line up with each of these letters. In Ephesians, it's the tree of life. In the letter to Smyrna, it's a crown, like Abraham being crowned among the nations, and on and on. And at the end, Laodicea, there's the I'll come and eat with you, Holy Communion. This is a Sabbath image, Sabbath worship. And so we have this 7-day scheme that comes up over and over in the book of Revelation that we're going to have to revisit as we keep going. Okay, then we come to chapter 4. Chapter 4 opens like this. Chapter 3 ends, the letters end with Laodicea, where Jesus says, I'm at the door knocking. If you open, I will feed you and eat with you, right? Well, now in chapter 4, finally, it says this. After this, I looked, and there in heaven a door stood open, and the first voice, which I heard speaking to me like a trumpet, said, come up here, and I will show you what must soon take place. So John looks, and the door is open. It was just talking about a door a second ago. What door is this? It's actually the door into the true temple. Remember, the temple and the tabernacle had doors that opened up into the holy place and the Holy of Holies. This is what John is seeing in heaven. And what he's about to see is he's about to see ascension. Remember, Jesus died on the cross, and he rose in his resurrection. And then 40 days later, after he appeared to his disciples after resurrection, 40 days later, he ascended into heaven. And then 10 days after that, there was Pentecost, and the Spirit went out. And so the rest of the book, most of the rest of the book, has to do with the ascension and the Pentecost that we see in the book of Acts. Jesus ascending and the Spirit being sent down. So here in chapter 4, we get this worship passage. And you get, instead of Jesus, the one among the lampstands, you get God who's on the throne. And this is my really poor drawing, excuse me, that around the throne there's 4 living creatures, and they're the cherubim that we see in the Old Testament. One looks like a lion, another like an ox, another like a human, another like a eagle. And those are going to frame the rest of the book. We get this amazing description of the one seated on the throne and the rainbow around the throne. The rainbow reminds us of Genesis with Noah and the flood and the rainbow. And then there's the 24 elders around the throne. And these remind us of the 24 elders that David assigned to serve at the tabernacle in 1 Chronicles 23. So there's 24 angelic rulers around the throne. 1 Chronicles 25, excuse me. Okay, now we get to chapter 5. And as the worship continues, now you have in chapter 5, chapter 5 opens like this. I saw in the right hand of the one seated on the throne a scroll written on the inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. So in chapter 4, we have the angels, the 7 living creatures, and the 24 elders, the angels, all worshiping God. But it's before Jesus has come, before Jesus has ascended. Well, now in chapter 5, there is this scroll in the right hand. Pretend this is the scroll. It's in the right hand. And the mighty angel says, who is worthy to open the scroll? Who is worthy? No one on earth or in heaven or under the earth was able to open this scroll. That means no angel was worthy, no one living, or no one who was righteous in the Old Testament. Moses couldn't open it. Noah couldn't open it. Abraham, no one. No one could open it until Jesus comes up and he ascends. Jesus is the first one in heaven. He's the first human being in heaven. He comes into heaven. We can only go into heaven through him. He comes. He's able to open the scroll. And as he opens the scroll, in ancient times, there were seals on the scroll. And here there were 7. And you actually had to pop each seal before the book could open. So it would go, and each one would pop open. Well, it turns out that each seal actually had a picture on it. And the picture was big enough that you could actually see a scene. So chapter 6 is going to tell us what each of these seals looked like. And these seals are basically a table of contents. They basically point forward to what this book is going to be like. So this book has a lot of 7s. There's 7 letters to 7 churches. There's 7 seals, which are the table of contents of the rest of the book. And as the book is opened, then we see the main content. We get the 7 trumpets. Trumpets are like a word proclaiming. It's like a sermon, the message of the book. And then we get the 7 bowls or chalices. The 7 bowls remind us of Holy Communion, and we'll get there later. And so this book, the book of Revelation, is an exciting book. A lot of times we misunderstand it. A lot of times we get overwhelmed by it. But instead of thinking about it as all of these bloody, scary battles that are going to happen in the future, primarily we can look at this book as a way of how Jesus ascends into heaven after he's resurrected and then sends his Holy Spirit out. And all of these battles have to do with the spiritual dimension of how the gospel is sent out to all the nations. How when Paul and Stephen in the book of Acts preach, they get beaten up, but the church continues to grow. And as people are baptized and come into the faith, there's a sense in which they die. And that has to do with the death that we see in this book. It's a spiritual death that we see in baptism, where you die and rise with Christ. So I hope you enjoyed this short introduction to the first 6 chapters of the book of Revelation. I hope it's a blessing, that you have a great rest of your day. Peace.